Okay, so we're ready to draw chapter 7 and introduce some more commands. This is the part we're going to draw. You bracket. Looking at this, I'm trying to figure out what I need to draw first. I see I've got information shown in the front view and I've got information that's shown in the top view. Now, I mentioned the other day if you've got a circular pattern, even a half circle that's shown, sometimes that's a good place to start. So this one's got a half circle in the front view and then it's got circles in the top view too. So since the half circle in the top view is extruded differently from in regards to length and even level with the edges, this one's not level with the edges of the other circular pattern. So I think I'm going to start with slot first, and also I'm going to line up my origin with the very center here so that if I do a symmetrical extrusion of this half round that I can work that out. So this is an English dimension, so I got a new, and of course English, standard IPT, and ready to create that. And I'm going to start this one, start a sketch. I'm just going to start this one on the top view just to kind of line it up with the other part. And looking at this, notice that my grid lines are on. Remember, we talked about that before. That's another way of trying to be sure that you are in sketch mode instead of feature mode. If you go to application options, one of the things, if you go right to sketch, you can see the grid lines are on. If I turn those off, click apply, you can see in the background to go away. Like I said, I really like them on. Click apply, so you can see those on. If I go to part, if I want to change some of the defaults under application options, it's a good place to start to do that. When it says sketch on new part creation, it says no new sketch, which means every time I go into Inventor, it gives me the choice of starting to sketch on whichever plane I want to. 90% of the time, sketches are started on XY. So if you want to use XY, that's fine, or any of the others. But I kind of left that alone. And then sketch. We talked about grid lines. We talked about snap to grid. That's something that I really don't care to use. One thing I noticed that is something that I looked at one time. I didn't know I was missing it till I used Inventor that didn't have it. But look at sketch plane on sketch creation and edit in part of our environment. Not worried about assembly environment right now. But if you ever getting ready to start a new sketch and you like the way the screen changes so that you are facing that plane you work on, you can check that too. Not really a big deal. But anyway, I'm going to close that. Just kind of looking around at some of those. The first sketch I'm going to start with is going to be a slot. So under rectangle, you can see you have some different choices. Since I want my origin to be in the center of this rectangle, of this slot, and in the center of my whole part, I'm going to use slot center point. And I'm not going to put any dimensions to start with. Just go ahead and draw that. It could be that when you first draw it, you're not really sure if the dimension that you put in is half of that center to center dimension or if it is the center to center dimension. So just drawing that, then I can pull a dimension and see what it did. And if it's not correct, I can change it. Notice it's got the tangent constraints in here and any other constraints I might need. So I'm to dimension that's center to center, and that's got to be 5. And because I centered that up based on the center of the slot, then the dimension halfway from here to that one should be half of the 5-inch dimension, and it is. And these two ends are 1, and when I change one, the other one changes too. I want to go ahead and extrude this with the hole in it, 2 holes. So that one is 0.5. This one is the same, but instead of putting a dimension, I'm going to click on the dimension and click circle. And then instead of typing anything in here, I'm going to point to that and use the check mark. And it's always going to be equal to that other dimension. So I'm going to right click, finish sketch. and I'm going to click on the house so I can see and look at this. Now we can open up any of these tabs that we want to, and notice that we've got our 3 planes here and our 3 axes and our center point. So if we want to see where these planes are, then we can turn on the visibility, can right click, turn on the visibility, and probably I don't need all of these, but just turning those all 3 in, you can see that all 3 of my planes are at the center of the part. Let me look here. Okay, and so when I created that, I haven't extruded anything yet, but you can see where my planes are at this time. So I'm gonna take the visibility off for now, at least for, well, that was probably the one I wanted to keep on. Anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and take off all of these right now. Then I'm going to do extrude, and I'm going to choose that, and that is a 1/2 inch. And now if I turn this one on, visibility, then you can see that that plane goes right through the center of the part. So this next sketch, I can actually click on that plane, and I'm going to be drawing in the center of the part. I'm going to turn this to an isometric view so you can see that grid pattern, how it follows that plane. And I can turn off the visibility of that plane if I want to. I'm just going to leave it be right now. So I'm going to draw an arc, but I'd really rather be facing this. I won't go to that right view again, because I want to be able to either snap to the edge in a previous sketch, or I might have to draw a line there, or I might even have to, which I will have to draw a line anyway, but I might even want to dimension to it. So I'm going to draw a circle. If you want to use arc, you can, and snap to that center point, which that's going to be 0, 0, 0, right? And then I'm going to draw a line in here. Let's see if I can snap. I did snap to that, and got a yellow point and snap there. So now I can trim this up. And so now I just have the half round shape. So I'm going to go back to the house view, and then I'm going to extrude this. I'm going to skip right over finish sketch and go right to extrude, which will take me out of the sketch and put me in feature mode already. So of all the choices that I have here, if I look at these, then I can see I've got a symmetrical one here, and the length of that is 2.5, I believe. And so when I do that, then I can see that's the way the part looks with the sketch plane. And if I'm done with that, I'm just going to turn off the visibility of that. So you can see now I've created my part, and you see it followed it. I did it symmetrical, so I had just as much protruding the front as the back. So now all I've got left to do is cut a hole in here, and this one, one of the things that's mentioned in the PowerPoint, talks about visual style. And if we look under the View tab, if we look under Visual Style, and we go to Wireframe, so you can see that wireframe may be a good place to work on occasion if you want to be sure you're in the center of that part or something. Let me get out of orbit. And I'm going to go back to shaded. So I want to draw a sketch, start a sketch on this face. And so this one, I'm going to use rectangle. And I'm just going to use the 2-point rectangle, and then I'm just going to draw a rectangle and not worry about dimensions yet until I get ready to dimension, which I am now, but not really worried about where that rectangle is in regards to my part. So now I want to bring it, I want it to touch my part. So I'm going to make that 0. And then I'm going to put in this length. And before I change that, I'm just going to accept that even though I know it's not the dimension I want. And then I'm going to click on my origin and this edge. And I want that to always be this dimension divided by 2. So that way, when I change this dimension to what it needs to be, which is 2 inches, then this one will change automatically also, and that rectangle will always be in the center. So this dimension is 1, so that's my rectangle. I'll right click Finish Sketch, go to Extrude. If it doesn't pick it for me, then I can pick it, and I want it to cut. When I click on Cut, it automatically turns it the other way. I'm going to use All, because if I ever want to change the dimension of the half round part, then I can change that. Now I've got my part. I've got a rectangular cut out. Go back to my house. So the last thing to do with this is to put a hole in it. So I want to draw on this surface underneath here, this flat surface. I can use wireframe if I want to, or I can just turn my part so that I can see that surface right here. And then I can choose to start a sketch on that surface. And then I'm going to draw a hole in here. And that hole was 1/4 inch, I believe. And then 3D model, go straight to extrude. It's picked that for me. I want it to be a cut, and I'm going to go all for that one too. Click OK. So now you see we've got that part. If there's an example in the book of changing the rectangular slot to a round one, to a half round, if I plan to do that, you know, I can erase this rectangular cutout. I can also suppress it. One of the things that was talked about earlier in the chapter was talking about born, and it talked about orphans, and it talked about parents and children. And sometimes you have to be careful if an extrusion like this one was based on a previous one, then if you delete it, then you may lose that. So let's see what happens if first I left click for it to turn blue, and then I right click, and then I use suppress features. Then you see, because that extrusion number 4 was a child to extrusion number 3, when I suppress that, it suppressed that one too. So that's okay, but I can still do that, and I can start another sketch. And if, for example, I had one in here that was a half round cutout, and I don't remember what dimension they were going to do that, 2.5 inch diameter. And then I'm just going to do a cut. So I'm going to switch right over to 3D model, extrude. It picked it for me. I'm going to do a cut, and then I'm going to do through all. Notice that I didn't have to make it a half round. And there I've got that one. And if I want to do that hole, then I'm going to have to do it over again. If you notice, I can't draw it on a round surface because it needs to be a hole that is perpendicular to a plane. So if I go back and look at some of these planes, then I can see, I'm going to turn the visibility of this one on so you can see. If I draw the little 1/4 inch hole on this plane and then make it cut all the way through, then it'll cut through this part, and it'll also cut through air too, which doesn't really matter. So I'm going to click that, and just so I can see it, I'm going to turn to the bottom of the part, and then I'm going to make that a 1/4, and then I'm going to switch over to 3D model extrude. And if it doesn't choose it for me, I may have to orbit it around a little bit to actually find it, but it did find it for me. Instead of distance, I'm going to do through all. Click OK. What happened? Right click, edit feature. Okay, it did a join. So cut all, and there it is. And I can turn off the visibility of that plane if I'm done with it. So you see, this way, if I decide that, I want to suppress this one, I can suppress that one. Notice that my hole stayed. And that's because it was based on a plane. It wasn't based on the extrusion that I suppressed. If I unsuppress this one, it doesn't like the fact that I've got those two holes in there, but in fact it's got a little exclamation point here, but it still looks correct. So I've got that part with the rectangular or the half round. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was Lab 7.4, and here's an example of one that's already drawn. I've cut on the visibility of that center plane so you could see how that part was started, and whichever side you start out with, try to keep your 0 point in the center of the part, and that way, see, I've got this shape that is extruded differently from this shape. But if I do a symmetrical extrude for both of those, then they're going to end up in the correct place. Also, if you draw, say, this cylinder first and extrude it, and then you go back, say, on this plane again, and let's say you're drawing this shape, then be sure that you put a tangent constraint when you've got a half circle here to complete that profile. Be sure you pick up a constraint there. I was going to see if I could show you an example of this one. Okay, that was the first sketch. So this particular person started with that sketch. That was a good place to start. And then went back and added the other part. So whichever way you want to do that would be fine.